Hey, so here's the review of Joker, guys. Well, let's sort of start with the actual structure of the story and its setting, for example, which is kind of important to the nature of the film itself. So if we were to say that this was set in any one year, we could very easily say that this was set in in any one timeline. We could say that this was closely set in the Nolan timeline. So the film itself is actually set in 1981. They state that outright. And there's a relevant point to that. Here it is. 1981 was right around the time that Reaganomics really started setting in. There were huge budget cuts to social services, and a lot of the state hospitals and state-funded healthcare programs were slashed. Also, unions were disempowered from the bargaining table. Ronald Reagan was very anti-union. He did a lot of union busting in just the first couple of years. His whole economic policy was based on what is known by most as trickle-down. And throughout much of his first term, he kept saying, this'll work, stay the course. And eventually what happened was the market recovered from the initial shock and started to balance out because it could only decline so far, but it didn't really improve. And further efforts since then have not helped the cause, as more and more tax cuts have been made towards the wealthy and elite, so that corporations and millionaires and billionaires are not paying their fair share of taxes. Anyway, so the story takes place with a character named Arthur Fleck, and there is significance to that name as well. Arthur is a name that denotes destiny, as in King Arthur. King Arthur, of course, pulled the sword from the stone. He was the one true king to unite the people. You follow me? But then Fleck. Fleck specifically means a spot or a stain. So he's a person of great destiny who is nothing but a spot or a stain within society. And so is his mother, who is Penny Fleck. Penny, of course, is the smallest denomination of currency, if you follow. So she herself is small, considered basically worthless, and nothing but a spot. And they live in a little dingy apartment. They don't indicate that it's a dirty apartment, just there's no light ever in this apartment. All of the windows face walls, and it just goes from there. The inciting incident that we can look at are multifold. So one of the inciting incidents that sort of happens is, well, let's look at it this way. There's lots of little incidents that happen along the way. Each one gives a little bit more of a nudge and a tap towards Arthur Fleck eventually becoming the Joker in this story. And we're told, like, oh, okay, this is within the continuity of Batman. There is a Wayne family. It's not just in its own little bubble in some other part of the world from Gotham. This is a character who genuinely lives in Gotham City, is a Gothamite, and just kind of lives in the poor side of town. And he works as a clown for a service that just requests clowns to go out into the city and cheer people up. He performs at hospitals. He holds a sign and waves it around in front of a business that's going out of sale. All these kinds of things. Basic stuff that we accept today as promotional stuff. But let's look at some of the inciting incidents that really set things in motion. First off, Arthur is doing exactly that, waving a sign in front of a business that's going out of sale, when some boys run along, grab his sign, and he gives chase. Now, in an ideal world, they would just sort of drop the sign or give it back to him. and, apologize for stealing it, or they might hassle him a little bit and then, drop the sign and whatever. But instead, they use the sign to assault him and actually shatter it. So it's unusable. And, of course, he's got a heavy blow to the face at that point and is on the ground. And once he's on the ground, they kick him. Now that, of course, is part of the inciting incident. Something that goes against the nature of how the rightful order would be. The natural order of things. The natural order of things would be, maybe these boys hassle him a little bit and he takes it in good fun. Or, they run off with his sign and then they give it back. They played a little joke on him. And, but no harm was done. He goes back and finishes the job. Instead, he gets beaten up and bruised badly. Then, from there, 2 events happen. All right, so we've got the one event leading to 2 separate events that happen. Those 2 events are one of his coworkers gives him a gun with bullets, and it's just a little, I think they call it a Saturday Night Special. It's one of those little 5 or 6 bullet guns that just, doesn't carry much ammunition, but is very much lethal. And the other thing that happens is the store owner complains that he didn't come back. He just disappeared and didn't come back. But they all know that he got beaten up. They can see the bruises on his body. So the boss says, I'm going to have to take the cost of that sign that the store owner is charging us with since it disappeared. I'm going to have to deduct that from your paycheck. So that's the second event from just the first event happening. And everything else there cascades and builds, because it seems like everything kind of builds up in like almost a doubling effect, if you follow. So the gun leads to an incident at the when he's performing at a children's hospital, and it falls out of his pocket. And it carries on from there. So it just keeps going and going and going until eventually everything is whirling out of control around him. He is told something by his mother that upsets him, and he goes on a quest to seek the truth. Every action leads to a logical response to a fault. But then how he handles each incident is really what defines him. And in certain instances, how he handles it is not always the best way. And that's partially what's going on here. One of the other problems is he seeks mental health with a psychologist, and the psychologist doesn't care about him. He has suicidal ideations. And rather than try and help him with that, they just give him pills and then send him on his way. And at one point, the psychologist actually says, I don't care about you. I don't care about any of this. I don't even really care that much about myself. There is so much apathy in this society that it all kind of is wrong. One of the other aspects to this character that you need to know is that he has delusions. And I don't mean like delusions of grandeur where he thinks of himself as being rich or famous or whatever. He occasionally has delusions more of acceptance, kindness, feelings of belonging, feelings of a male father figure showing him acceptance. Namely, the example that we can look at is Robert De Niro's character of Murray Franklin. And he's basically a Johnny Carson type of celebrity. He's there in Gotham, and he's very popular, but when Arthur performs in a sketch comedy show, or not a sketch comedy show, but just kind of an open mic night kind of deal, he ends up getting taped, and that tape makes its way to Murray Franklin, who then makes fun of him. Now, the problem is that in comedy, this is punching down. You're looking at a struggling comedian who obviously has something going the matter, and can't quite get his routine right or even get it out, because Arthur has an affect from his mental illness that causes him, when he's anxious or what have you, and this is introduced from the onset, it causes him to essentially sound like he's laughing when he's not actually laughing. And it's essentially like a form of Tourette's, if you follow, where instead of having like a facial tic or having, making various sounds or saying words, he just affects a kind of laugh, and his face pulls back. And what this is, we know this in neurology, is it's kind of a reflex action, if you will. It's involuntary, and it's the brain short-circuiting from a pathway that gives a laughter and smile reaction from a sort of pain or fear reaction. So imagine that there are two paths in your brain. One leads to laughing and smiling, and the other leads to crying or screaming. And your brain goes along those paths, sends a signal, but the paths are really close together, and the signal accidentally gets rerouted to wherever your laughing and smiling reaction is. That's basically what happens with Arthur, only it's involuntary, much like a lot of fear responses. The fear response itself is a very primal response, whereas the smiling and laughing one might be a bit more conscious. You can kind of overrule it if you need to, if you want to hold it back. But screaming and yelling, that's going to be a bit more of a natural reaction. So if his brain is short-circuiting to that place of laughing and smiling when he's not really supposed to, that's part of the problem. Now, there are people, and this is important to note, who have said that the film kind of exemplifies involuntary celibacy. This is not the case. And I really do have some sympathy for guys who think that sex is some kind of end-all be-all that's going to solve their problems. There are a lot deeper problems if your main priority in any kind of value in yourself is seen only by your sexual conquests. But that's not a question in this. Here, Arthur has strict delusions and commits at least one act of stalking, two really if you want to count it, related to a woman who lives down the hall with her kid. And she's just some woman. He doesn't know her. They just pass each other in the hall once, and every interaction since then may or may not have existed. And several are confirmed later on in flashback that they never existed. This will not spoil your enjoyment because this movie has a lot of rewatch value. So you're going to enjoy this. It ends up being a little bit better than like some films like Fight Club or what was the other one? Middle School, 6th grade, the worst year of my life, or something like that. There was a film like that came out a few years ago. This one doesn't really have involuntary celibacy as part of it, and I'll tell you why. Because a lot of people who are on mental health medication, especially ones dating back in the 1980s, if it involved anti-anxiety meds, antidepressants, those kinds of things, it didn't. It killed your libido, basically. So you had no sexual interest. You might still like showing affection. You'll very easily still want a loving relationship, but you can't actually have sexual interest because of the way these antidepressants work. Many of them had chemical elements that were in common with, what would you call it, chemical castration drugs. Unfortunately, pharmacology hadn't really advanced very much further since the 1940s by then. Since that time, fortunately, it has, but back then, yeah, it really hadn't. So anyway, back when I first saw the leaked footage that had gotten out, of Joaquin Phoenix as the Joker, I wasn't sure if this was going to work, because Phoenix has a very different physicality, and he lost a lot of weight for the role to really slim down. And it kind of shows, unfortunately, because he has this very broad build in his shoulders and torso. But then he also has these very broad features to his face, and the Joker, notably, has very fine features in most of his portrayals. He has a very slim nose. He has a very drawn look to his cheeks. I wasn't sure if it was going to work. And indeed, every time they've shown him in the makeup, it's always been kind of lackluster. It hasn't quite felt right. But then, in the very last act, you've got the very first act, and then you've got the very last act. You've got a very structured setting to all of this. But in the last act, he starts really giving in. The first real break that he has as a person is after he gets told that he's fired from his job because of the gun at the children's hospital. He's on his way home, and he gets harassed by some Wayne Corps executives. This causes, this is after they're harassing a woman who looks to him as if to say help, but he's scared. And because he's scared, he, of course, starts laughing. And they're like, what the heck is that clown laughing at? Here's this clown dressed in full garb laughing, and they're already laughing. So, their problem, though, is that he seems to be laughing at them instead of laughing with them. And this ends up being very quickly a problem as they start to assault him. Now, of course, he has the gun, and they're kicking him when he attacks. And he goes after them. He takes out 2 of the 3, and then takes out a third on the station. And just sort of carries on from there. Of course, he's on security camera, or at least I think he was, but many of the reporters, anyway, are taking witness accounts and saying, yeah, he was dressed as a clown. So this is all kind of odd. At any rate, normally this kind of thing would be a one-off incident, but then other stuff starts to happen, and as I said, things kind of compound from there. They sort of cascade, if you follow. It goes from 1 incident to 2 incidents to more and more and more out from there. And he's such a small person that it cascades over time until he's huge. And what finally really brings in the moment, he dyes his hair green, he's put on the white makeup, he's going to make himself up in his clown face, but this is the first time he's really put all the effort into it, and he looks amazing. The smile is slightly askew. The blue around his eyes is very neatly defined. And of course, his hair is green, and it's just combed back very neatly. And under the stage lighting on the Murray Franklin show, he really does look the part. As soon as you see him on that television, you believe this is the Joker. He's in the full costume, the purple suit, the teal button-down shirt, the gold vest. Everything about him is exactly the Joker. And looking at his facial reactions, listening to his voice, listening to him speak on subjects, it is the words of that madman from the comic books. It is totally and absolutely the character of the Joker. And I suspect that scene was written first, and then they built back from that when they were writing this. In a lot of writing exercises, it's an exercise where you start with the ending, and then you fill in, and you decide where did it start. And and you decide, okay, well, this is what happened, and injustice was done. Okay, what happened after that? What happened after that? Okay, how does it lead to this event that defines him? That is the big final stroke, and just keeps going. So you look at all of the stuff that's sort of happening, and you see exactly how A led to Z, if you follow, where this is the A event and this is the Z event. And then everything after that is sort of the denouement. But this is a really interesting story because, and this is really where I'm going to get into spoilers, because through circumstances and events, he ends up murdering his mother, smothering her in her hospital bed. He ends up killing his father figure. And as a sort of side note, almost, the person who murders Thomas Wayne and Martha Wayne is one of Joker's followers, because he builds a following as people start rioting. And part of the reason why people start rioting and he builds a following and everyone is dressing up as clowns as they're rioting here in the 80s over the financial hardships is because he killed Wayne Corps executives. He showed that these people were touchable, that they were not beyond reproach. And in the particular incident that happens, these guys really do think that they can just do whatever they want, that they can harass a woman, that they can assault another passenger on a train, that they are somehow beyond the law, and that they don't have to be decent human beings. And you see this a lot with people who have some form of privilege, that they feel they can't be touched, that nobody will dare strike back at them, that they are untouchable gentry, because they have money, fine clothes, that kind of thing. So they can do whatever they want to smaller people. And honestly, I kind of love it. I kind of like this movie a lot more than I thought I would. It's not that bad. It's not even remotely terrible. It has its points where it's like, I really wish they would have gone without that. It's a little bit too gruesome at some parts, but it's meant to be, because it is in many ways a horror movie. It's not about a happy man. It is about a man who puts on a smiling face because the world doesn't want to see him suffer. And in my sort of predictory review, I said that it looked like it was kind of tapping into The Man Who Laughs, which is the origins of the Joker. It's this 1930s black and white film about a man who, as a child, was mutilated by a doctor who wanted to conduct sick experiments, basically, by manipulating the muscles of the face using some kind of hook system on his face so that his muscles would permanently be in a smile, the kid's. And this is after the kid's father is basically imprisoned for life and left to rot by the nobility for falling out of favor in court. And what follows is he's kind of an anti-hero throughout much of the story. And this is kind of the case here. Right up until maybe the final act of, let's say it's a 3-act structure, right up until that third act where things pick up, you have Arthur taking his revenge against and defending himself against these guys who are about to beat him, or are beating him, on a train after they harass a woman also on the train. And it just carries on from there. The first act is self-defense. The second act is revenge. The third act is murder. Follow me? So, the act of revenge takes place when he kills his mother, and who lies to him because she's mentally unsound. And he takes revenge on that. He's been taking care of her all these years, and now she's told him a huge lie that wasted his time and got him in trouble and caused one of the wealthiest people in town, Thomas Wayne, to punch him, in fact. And it's really an awful situation. But the other act of revenge, and I would say the main act of revenge, is when Arthur kills the coworker who gave him the gun. The coworker actually said that Arthur tried to buy it off him. So that way he's not accountable. So as soon as there's a little bit of bad news coming his way, he, leaves Arthur holding the dirty buck, passes it back to him. When really, in an ideal world, again, he would have fessed up to it, and both he and Arthur would have been fired, or they would have been put on reprimand in some way. But, there was justification for saying, Arthur, here, carry this gun. You got assaulted. You shouldn't be getting assaulted. None of us should be. We're just clowns. We don't go out hurting people. We go out to entertain and make people laugh and smile. Anyway, with all that said, it's a strong movie. One of the great images that is kind of very subtle is at one point Arthur is climbing up this hill, up this infinite staircase. And he eventually gets to the top, but he is just heaving and pushing himself to carry on and get up to the top of the hill from these stairs and keep going. And this is in order to get home. He has to climb up out of this abyss every day, from the subway station up to his house. And by contrast, when he's leaving for the studio, for the Murray Franklin show, he is descending, but he is descending with glee. It is a downhill slope, and it is easy, and he's having the time of his life going. He has taken his revenge against someone who wronged him, and he is going to be on the show that he's always wanted to be on. He's fantasized about it with someone who he sees as a father figure that his mother idolized. And he is going in this beautiful garb that he's put on, so he feels resplendent. He's free of many of his hang-ups. He no longer has to take care of his mother. He no longer has to worry about a lot of this stuff. He's going forward, and there are no more strings holding him back, as it were. And the detectives are right there at the top and have to take forever to get down to him. After they say, we have some questions for you, we need to know what's going on, so on and so forth, and he starts running. And because there are all these clown protesters on the subway, he gets away. The cops start searching people and attacking people, and at this point these people are rioters, so they don't care. They've had enough of the cops. They've had enough of the system overlooking them, holding them back, keeping them down. So they go on the rampage against these two cops and put them in the hospital, and the Joker gets away. So while obviously I don't approve of it, I don't approve of violence personally, I don't approve of murder especially, I appreciate a lot of the elements of the storytelling that show this is how this person, who at first was a marginal little nobody, and then he became an anti-hero, and then he became a villain. This is how he descended. This is how this house of cards fell apart. Things were already shaky. So when I say it's a house of cards, I literally mean it's a house of cards. And in this case, the house of cards fell over, and the Joker came out on top. Yeah, I know, that was a bit of a stretch there to get there, but I think that joke was worth it. Anyway, and what better to end this review than to end on a joke and a laugh. At any rate, thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again later. Take care, and if you want to, click like, ding the bell, hit subscribe, and you can leave a constructive and respectful comment below. I'll look forward to reading them. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.